This episode of the History Guy is brought to you by the military online game War Thunder. In November of 1944, a multinational Allied force accomplished a little-remembered amphibious invasion that was intended to secure the use of the port at Antwerp. Facing a dug-in and determined enemy, ground, naval, and air forces, utilizing some of the strangest vehicles in the Allied arsenal, conducted an operation that historian Patrick Delaforce described as difficult as Operation Overlord, but in miniature. Operation Infatuate II, the Allied invasion at West Capella, deserves to be remembered. I really think that people who enjoy history, such as myself, will enjoy this great game that I've been playing, which is called War Thunder, which you can play now for free on PC, Xbox, and PlayStation. You can play tanks or planes, helicopters, and ships in fast, fun, dynamic player versus player battles. You can play more than 2,000 vehicles, covering a period of 100 years from the 1920s to today, each with incredible detail, rendered down to individual components. The incredible details rendered in 4K resolution, combined with the authentic sound effects and the beautiful music, make for a truly exciting and immersive game experience. It's really the most comprehensive vehicle combat game that was ever made. The combat system is so realistic. Vehicles don't just have hit points, they suffer actual damage to the components and the crew, which you can see on an innovative damage x-ray. And the tanks are so much fun. The fire and the smoke effects really give you that you are there experience, but I also love the fighter planes, where action is fast and furious. Whether you're looking for an action-packed battle or a more realistic tactical challenge, the game offers PvP battles for all play styles. Whatever game experience you fancy, you can find it on War Thunder. So play War Thunder now for free on PC, Xbox, and PlayStation using the link in the description. Now, for a limited time, new players and players who have not played for at least 6 months across all platforms can claim a large bonus pack that includes multiple premium vehicles, premium account time, an exclusive 3D decorator for your vehicles, and much more. So again, use that link in the description and play War Thunder for free now. It is a game experience that deserves to be remembered. The breakout from the Normandy beachhead is generally considered to have begun with Operation Cobra, launched July 25th. The breakout freed the Allies from the difficult battles of the Bocage country and shifted the war on the Western Front to one of maneuver. In August, the Allies rapidly enveloped and then destroyed 15 divisions of German Army Group B in the Battle of the Falaise Pocket, killing some 10,000 and forcing the surrender of 50,000 more. The Battle of Normandy was officially declared over on August 30th. But the Allied breakout produced its own challenges as lines of supply became stretched. The next priority was the capture of ports vital to keep the Allied army supplied and fuel their advance into Germany itself. Among the most important was the port of Antwerp. The website Defining Moments Canada explains, the next big objective for the Allies was the capture of Antwerp, the largest port in Europe. The Belgian city was essential for Allied logistics, food, ammunition, fuel, and other supplies, so the push into Germany could continue. The Allied advance moved quickly. HistoryofWar.org explains that the German 15th Army was forced into a chaotic retreat, was unable to stop the Allies from liberating Brussels on 3 September or Antwerp on 4 September. The rapid advance and capture of Antwerp by the British 11th Armored Division had a significant impact. The swiftness of the division's advance had surprised the German commander, General Major Graf Christoph Stolberg zu Stolberg, who, on being captured, confessed he had not expected the sudden British arrival and thus had been unable to demolish the port's facilities. One of the greatest ports in the world had been captured, virtually undamaged. HistoryofWar.org notes the port's importance. The Allies urgently needed access to the port to solve their supply problems, which saw almost all of the supplies needed to keep the offensive running having to come by road from Normandy. Antwerp was a huge port, capable of taking ships of up to 19,000 tons and up to 1,000 ships of varying sizes, with 10 square miles of docks, 20 miles of water frontage, 60 cranes, and all the related infrastructure. In comparison, Le Havre, the main cargo port on the Channel coast, eventually discharged 14,000 tons of supplies per day. But having captured the important port, HistoryofWar.org writes, British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery made his biggest mistake of the war. Montgomery had settled on a daring plan to end the war quickly by a quick thrust across German-occupied Netherlands. The attack, Operation Market Garden, would end up failing to achieve its ambitious goals. But there was another consequence as well, as Montgomery's plan had diverted attention away from a critical objective. When Antwerp was captured, the Germans were in disarray. historyofwar.org writes, if he had ordered a strong attack to the west, along the banks of the Scheldt estuary, which connected Antwerp to the sea, the Germans would have been unable to put up much of a fight. But War History Online explains, as the window of opportunity closed, an attempt to exploit beyond Antwerp to the west was not made. Instead, Montgomery and the Airborne High Command struck towards the Rhine in Holland with Operation Market Garden. Montgomery assumed that the many retreating German forces that had been left behind would offer little resistance, but historyofwar.org explains the Allies had underestimated the German ability to recover from the disastrous end to the Normandy campaign, both in Germany itself and in Belgium. While the Allies were focusing on Arnhem, the German 15th Army was recovering its strength, forming the mass of stragglers of August into a formidable defense force. The Germans were given enough time to build strong defenses in the Scheldt estuary and fill the river with mines. In their failure to destroy the German elements in Belgium and northern France when they could, the Allies had allowed the Germans to develop a strong, fortified defensive position along the north bank of the Scheldt estuary. Therein lay the problem. Antwerp is an inland deep-water port, but it is accessed via the Scheldt River. So long as the Germans held the mouth and north bank of the river, shipping could not get to Antwerp. The vital port was virtually useless unless the Allies could dislodge the newly reformed German 15th Army. The task for what would be called the Battle of Scheldt fell to the 450,000 men of the 1st Canadian Army. Veterans.Canada explains, under the command of General Henry Duncan Graham Harry Crerar, the 1st Canadian Army was international in character. In addition to the 2nd Canadian Corps, which included the 2nd, 3rd Canadian Infantry Divisions and the 4th Canadian Armored Division, the 1st British Corps and the 1st Polish Armored Division, and at various times American, Belgian, and Dutch soldiers were also included as units. The fight against the some 230,000 men, well entrenched and supported by heavy guns of the German 15th Army, was particularly difficult. RoyalMarines.org explains that German gun emplacements virtually provided a continuous fortification, bristling with guns of every caliber. Veterans.Canada continues, the flooded, muddy terrain and the tenacity of the well-fortified German defenses made the Battle of the Scheldt especially grueling and bloody. Indeed, the battle is considered by some historians to have been waged on the most difficult battlefield of the Second World War. The expansive battle included 4 significant objectives, but perhaps the most challenging was the heavily fortified Dutch island of Walcheren, at the mouth of the Scheldt River, in an operation called Operation Infatuate. Part of that operation included an amphibious attack by the 4th Special Service Brigade on the far west side of the island, near the city of Westkapelle. The 4th Special Service Brigade included commandos of the Royal Marines and British Army, as well as the number 10 Inter-Allied Commando, which included volunteers from France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Norway, Denmark, Poland, and Yugoslavia. The combined land, sea, and air operation was extraordinarily complex. Defining Moments Canada explains, Walcheren was a heavily defended island that guarded the North Sea approach to the Scheldt estuary. The region was also an obvious place for an invasion, and therefore heavily defended. With Allied bombers flying over the estuary on their way to attack targets in Germany, the banks were lined with bunkers, large coastal gun batteries, and extremely strong anti-aircraft defenses. In fact, the seaward-facing defenses at Walcheren were stronger than anything the British, Canadians, or Americans had faced in Normandy at D-Day. The prelude to the attack included a controversial decision. The island was protected by dikes, and to hamper German defenses, the Allies decided to inundate the island. Flyers were first dropped warning civilians to evacuate, and in October, RAF Bomber Command conducted raids on the dikes, flooding the island. Despite the warnings, the flooding killed some 180 civilians. The hope was not just that the flooding would hamper the German defenses, but would also allow Allied troops to operate more quickly in amphibious vehicles. In practice, the flooding may have hampered the attackers as much as the defenders. The area was defended by the German 70th Infantry Division, under the command of General Wilhelm Daser. The 70th Infantry Division had been formed late in the war, made up of men previously exempted from military service due to stomach disorders or injuries. The thinking was to group together such men to facilitate special diets. Well, obviously, this so-called stomach division was not a first-class fighting unit. On Walcheren, manning powerful static defense positions, they would fight tenaciously. The intent was to first soften defenses by heavy bombing, but weather over airfields in France and Belgium prevented the bombers from taking off, and air assault was limited to a squadron of 12 Typhoon fighter bombers of the RAF's 183rd Squadron. There was, however, a naval bombardment by the 15-inch guns of the battleship Warspite and 2 monitors, HMS Erebus and Roberts. The commandos of the 4th Special Service Brigade would be attacking in LVTs, landing vehicles tracked, amphibious tractors more familiar for use in the Pacific than Europe, and smaller amphibious vehicles, M29 Weasels. But landing under the fire of the heavy batteries would be deadly, even though some smaller batteries had been silenced by Warspite, Erebus, and Roberts. To protect the attack, a naval support squadron, called Support Squadron Eastern Flank, or SSEF, was assigned. Basil Wolfe, an engineer with SSEF, described the force. The SSEF was an assortment of flat-bottom beach landing craft consisting of gunboats, rocket-firing ships, infantry landing craft, and smaller personnel craft, headed up by a converted infantry landing craft, LCI, with additional communication equipment as a headquarters ship. The gunboats, called LCGs, landing craft gun, were armed with 17-pounder anti-tank, 25-pounder gun howitzers or 4.7-inch naval cannons, as well as 20mm Oerlikon cannons and .303 caliber machine guns. In addition, SSEF included LCTRs. The Naval History Society of Australia describes these vessels. And the most deadly of the support craft was the fantastic rocket craft, known as LCTR. Colonel Langley of Combined Operation Headquarters was responsible for this most spectacular development of naval firepower. He had the inspiration to use 65-pound explosive rockets fired from banks of projectors mounted in LCTs. A single craft could carry over 1,000 of them. But the German batteries were deadly, and further problems were caused as some of the rockets from the LCTRs were landing short, striking the invasion group. In his 1957 book, 85 Days, historian R.W. Thompson recorded that a flagship went up in a great gulp of flame from a direct hit by the enemy as 200,000 rounds of Oerlikon ammunition exploded. The second flagship was ablaze from our own rockets. The hospital LCT, turning back under orders to find a safer place, blew up on a sea mine. Men fell out of the sky to lie face down in their life jackets on the sea. Wolfe witnessed a disaster among the SSEF. 3 LCRs were coming up behind the main group of landing craft heading for the beach. A shell hit one of the LCRs directly on the starboard side. The craft listed badly, and pre-ignition set off 1,200 rockets that landed amongst the support squadron. I've never heard explosions like that in all my years of war. They appeared to go on for several minutes, but in reality it was probably 45 seconds. We had no ear protection. My stomach turned over. My ears rang with the clamor. I could do nothing but clap my hands to my ears and put my head down. From up above, I could hear screaming. I saw landing craft burning and sinking all around. The sea was on fire. Men were in the water, some motionless, some attempting to swim. Our ship was picking men out of the water. The well deck was full of injured sailors. 5 of our craft were sunk by this friendly fire. 30 sailors were injured. To protect the landing, 27 craft of the SSEF moved into short range to attack the remaining German batteries. It was a daring move, Thompson writes. Out of the smoke and spray, weaving like the tentacle of some ferocious sea beast, the LCGs of the support squadron went in at full speed, their 17-pounders and Oerlikons blazing. LCGs engaged the batteries, the 3.7-inch guns point blank, with a courage that was as sublime as it was hopeless. Wolfe recalled that the enemy fire was fierce and was systematically hitting the small craft approaching the beach. When LCG hit and on fire was abandoned on the beach, other craft were burning, sinking, and exploding. With this heavy fire from the shore batteries, we were being annihilated rapidly. Major Hillsman of the Royal Canadian Army Medical Corps witnessed the attack. Pinpoints of light sparked from the south batteries. The Germans were opening up at last. The whole line of support craft broke into flame and smoke. Ships blew up and were swallowed in one gulp. Others drifted aimlessly around, out of control. The ships of the SSEF had drawn the enemy's fire, but at great cost. Of the 27 ships, 9 were sunk, and 11 badly damaged beyond repair. Despite their sacrifice, the landings were still desperate. Delaforce writes in his 2001 book, Smashing the Atlantic Wall, that the scenes of amber and white beaches were as bad, perhaps worse, than most of the Normandy D-Day landings. The forward observers directing the fire were killed. The little weasels could not negotiate the impossible mixture of surf and beach obstacles. But the assault went on. The official history of the Canadian Army in the Second World War wrote that once our ramp was let down, all hell was let loose with a mixture of shells, mortar bombs, and small arms. Delaforce quotes Lance Sergeant L.A. Wells of the 80th Assault Squadron Royal Engineers. The scene ashore was one of absolute devastation. The sea was flooding through the gap in the dike. The church and most of the village were on fire. Shells were bursting everywhere. Tanks were coming to grief. Those tanks were specialized ones, designed especially for the D-Day landings. These were vehicles from Hobart's Funnies, named after Major General Sir Percy Hobart. Delaforce explains, for an island that was now 80% flooded, an armored presence was perhaps surprising. 4 landing craft tanks would land in close support on Red Beach, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Dahlmeyer, commanding officer of the Lothians and Border Horse, a team of 10 Sherman flail tanks, 2 Sherman gun tanks, and 8 armored vehicle Royal Engineers of the 87th Assault Squadron Royal Engineers, with fascines and bridges, would immediately land and push forward behind their troops of the 41st Commando with RN beach signals and seize the left shoulder of the gap. But the larger landing vehicle tanks proved compelling targets for the German defenses. Delaforce described what happened on an LST named Damson. At 0900 hours, Damson ran into fire 600 yards from shore. A shell collapsed the bridge carried by the Churchill AVRE, which in turn fell on a Lothian flail tank. An AVRE carrying a large wooden fascine was set alight by shell fire, and other vehicles were damaged. As Damson was making water and was also on fire, it was ordered back. Many vehicles never made it to shore. Many that did were bogged down or drowned in the tide. A few were unloaded successfully because apparently one of the German batteries had run out of ammunition at a critical time. But those few that made it into combat played an important role. Delaforce writes, Brigadier Lester later wrote to Colonel Dahlmeyer, the few tanks that got ashore were worth their weight in gold. Slowly under intense fire, with the few remaining tanks and the attacking rockets of the Typhoon fighter bombers, the men of the Special Services Brigade took the German batteries, one by one. It was a terrible fight. Thompson writes, the last 5 days at Walcheren were macabre, grisly. It's not simple to find words. Those last 5 days on Walcheren were war at its worst, its most senseless and evil. Consider the battle was lost irrevocably. These Germans on Walcheren could do nothing to impede the Allies. They could only drag down more dead with themselves, in their own shameful ruin. Delaforce writes that a civilian brought word that Lieutenant General Dager would probably surrender to a tank force to an officer of senior rank as a face-saving operation. But by then only 3 tanks were still in action, and they were miles away. Instead, a group was sent in the LVTs. Delaforce writes, they hoped they would be looking and sounding like genuine tanks. Dager surrendered on November 6th, 1944, 79 years ago, today. With him came 8,000 German soldiers taken into captivity. The final German troops defending the Scheldt surrendered on the 8th. In the end, despite the devastation of the battle, the most devastating effect on the civilian population came from the decision to bomb the dikes and inundate the island. While the warnings and slow pace of the flooding had limited civilian deaths, it had killed virtually all of the island's livestock, and destroyed or damaged some 14,000 of the 19,000 dwellings on the island. The process of draining the floodwater was not completed until 1946. It is ironic that the invasion of Walcheren is so little remembered, as it so well represents the wider war. Thompson wrote that it was a microcosm of the war. This little island, 9 miles by 9 miles, included the whole hideous story: invasion, occupation, fortification, bombardment, siege, counter-invasion, destruction. In Walcheren, even the land was destroyed. The source of life. Remember, play War Thunder now for free on PC, Xbox, and PlayStation using my link in the description and claim your massive bonus pack. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community at Locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.